Okay, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our first breakout session of the conference. I guess the first thing to sort of make clear is that this is session 2A, smarter, more flexible supply chains. We're looking at kind of inbound and say service parts side. If anyone was looking for the finished vehicle, the simple side of things, shall we say, that was across the space. So this is actually the kind of inbound parts session. So hopefully you're all where you want to be, and if not, well, you'll learn something new, I suppose. Quick introduction, I'm Christopher Ludwig. I'm the editor of the Automotive Logistics Group, and I'm Louis' sort of older, more mature colleague, so I'm not going to go on about football and age jokes and things like that. You know, we'll try and keep it more serious in this, although we may talk a little bit about Champions League later in the session, as it were. I hope you all enjoyed the first session. I think, you know, we maybe some mixed messages in terms of the outlook. We've got good growth right now, maybe not so good growth or kind of stagnant growth to come. Panic by some estimates of what's going on. Whether you agree that it's panic or not, it's certainly change. There's a lot of transformation as Christoph described it. You heard about those sort of mega trends. Both speakers referred to greater connectivity in vehicles. You can say also greater connectivity into factories as well with Internet of Things, more shared mobility and services, the rise of e-commerce, vehicle electrification, and new materials and sources in the supply chain. And we don't have to go to too many great lengths to kind of stress that all of these changes are impacting or will impact the supply chain and indeed logistic services as well. And this is the session where we kind of start digging in a little bit deeper to explore what some of those changes will mean and indeed what manufacturers, logistics providers are already doing in response to that change, to stay competitive, to stay relevant, in partnership perhaps with their specialists in IT, with their logistics providers, and across the supply base. So we're very pleased to have put together a panel here today that sort of captures a nice cross-section of that supply chain and what we can talk about in terms of smart logistics and increased visibility and things like that. So a quick introduction, and then we'll have the presentations, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. The first presentation we'll hear, will be a joint presentation or a shared presentation. We're going to hear from Buelent Ileri, who's the Director of Transport and Logistics for EAME at AGCO Corporation. And he'll be joined following by Julian Schulcz, who's the Executive Vice President for ForFlow, about some transformative projects happening in AGCO and across the supply chain there, certainly in terms of the positive impacts of digitalization. And we'll also hear from Michael Kluger, Vice President of Neovia Logistics. And as I said, part of the benefit in a way when we break into these smaller sections, we can drill down into more specifics and hopefully get everyone a little bit more involved. So we'll be looking for comments and questions from the audience as well to follow. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the panel over to Buelent.
Yeah, Christopher, thank you very much for the introduction.
Cheers, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really thrilled and honored to present you AGCO Smart Logistics together with Julian. For those who didn't know, I mean, we talked about Champions League, and AGCO and ForFlow won last week the European Logistics Award and Supply Chain. So we are really proud, as you can imagine, and this is mainly, let's say, what we will talk about in the next minutes. Who of you knows AGCO? Okay, I'm impressed. But I hope after my presentation, at least after the second slide, some more people will know who AGCO is. AGCO is a US-based company. We are listed at the New York Stock Exchange, so that's why we are not that known, but I think you will know our brands. I think in the beginning this morning, there was some discussion, what are expectations from logistic service providers? And one thing what was mentioned was we expect smart providers, we expect innovation, and I think what AGCO did with the support of ForFlow was we took our destination in our hands and defined it, let's say, the smart and innovative way, of course, with the support of logistics providers. Oh, I think to click. So we will tell you a little bit about AGCO. and afterwards we will also bring you what are the challenges for logistics supply chain at AGCO, what is our solution, and then Julian will go more into the details of our intelligent transportation management, and finally, of course, what have been, let's say, the results for what we have been awarded also. AGCO, I would say, is a startup. We are just 25, 27 years old. We have been built by a management buyout from a former Kluger Humboldt-Deutz spare parts division, I can say. And today we are the third biggest agricultural machine producer. We had last year a revenue of about 7.5 billion. And I saw numbers for the automotive industry just going up into one direction. And I'm really surprised that the mood here is very depressive, to be honest. I was expecting the automotive guys more funny and laughing. I don't know, maybe yesterday night you drank too much. Yeah? I don't know. But if you know where AGCO is coming from, or our industry, this turnover was 3 years ago 11 billion. So this went down by 30%. And this is, let's say, normal in our industry. So I don't know what you would do if this happens in your industry, if you would cry, but you see I'm still laughing. So everything is good. The revenue mainly is done, let's say, more than 50% in the so-called EAME region, Europe, Africa, Middle East. We are the biggest. The reason for that is, of course, of our brands, which has a heritage in Europe. Here you see our nice brands, and you can compare us, let's say, with Volkswagen, but of course not with the recent, let's say, issues. But of course we are a multi-brand company. I would like to start with Fendt. Fendt is clearly our premium brand, is also the technology leader in the market. So also our competitors appreciate, let's say, what Fendt is bringing on innovations onto the market. Followed by Massey Ferguson. You can compare this, let's say, with the Volkswagen, well established around the world. Everywhere you can find the Massey Ferguson red tractor. And then we have Valtra. This is our Finnish brand, mainly in Scandinavia, but also very strong in South America. Together with Massey Ferguson and Valtra, we have a market share of 50% only in South America. And Challenger, and this is really for the big boys, the SUV style, if you need a lot of horsepower, and you see with the tracks, this is the brand for that. GSI, this is, let's say, the logistics solution, if you so want. This is for the grain storage division of our company. So if you see here, this is a tractor, Massey Ferguson, from the 50s, where we come from. And if you still remember the first picture, this was our newest tractor, the Fendt 1000. And you see, we have 8 wheels, not only 4 like you have, and with 500 horsepower, so it's a huge machine. But if you see the development, what happens, and our major goal in our industry is to support our farmers. And we do this to increase productivity at the end of the day. And you see how we started. And interestingly, I would like to pick up the 1919 year. So you see here, auto guidance system. We are talking about autonomous driving with cars. We are doing this since more than 20 years. So our tractors, our combines, of course, we need to be fair, it's on the field, but they do autonomous driving already. And you will be surprised what other innovations we have in our industry. So, and I Googled and I was really curious, what happens in 1990 in the automotive industry? It was the first GPS in the car in 1990. So I'm really surprised that, you see, the agricultural business is very innovative. But of course, where are we today? Our, let's say, solution answer to connection industry 4.0 is we are connecting our machines. Our machines already talk to each other. They talk with the office, with the administration. So you can really see what do I yield on a square centimeter already. Why do we need this? Because the farmer wants to, let's say, for next year, for the fertilization of the ground, he can really decide how much do I need to put. So you see, we are really well advanced, and our newest, let's say, baby is our so-called Mars project. These are small logistics units, robots, which are going on the field and really feeding there the corn where it's needed. Okay, but now come to the topic. So as you can imagine, if you if you buy so many companies, and you see we grow through acquisitions over the last 20 years, you can imagine that you also, with each new brand, you buy a new network, right? You buy a new factory, you have additional suppliers, you have additional logistics providers, and so on. In addition, of course, to reduce some of the complexity, we do the same like automotive industry. We introduced a platform strategy. But of course, we also we have to scope with the requirements in transit times, in transparency, and cost. And more interestingly, and I told you about this very volatile turnover, and why is that? The reason is, if our farmers do not have the money, and we all hear these discussions, milk prices, wheat prices are going up and down, and this is exactly what happens then. If they don't have anything in their pocket, they will not invest. That's the reason why our industry was very challenged over the last 3 years. And in the middle you see, of course, we have the need, what everybody is doing at the moment, Industry 4.0 smart factories. So in order to support our smart factories, our initiative was focused on the inbound supply chain. That means from our direct material suppliers into the factories. So it's nice that our factories within our four walls, that the people and the machines and the robots talk to each other, but what about the gap from the suppliers to our smart factories? And that was the idea behind EcoSmart Logistics. So that you get an idea where we are, and I'm sure not all of you have seen a tractor factory from inside. I have a small, nice video where you see our tractor site in Beauvais in France. And you will see where we are using digitalization, big data, and why we are using it, of course, to increase productivity. So enjoy this movie. Yeah, really great. I'm really always impressed. I hope you're also impressed what our colleagues in France are doing. So, and you will understand, if you have these smart factories, for us it was obvious that we really need to change our way of working, especially for the inbound supply chain. So that means really, how can we connect our suppliers, our logistics partners to our smart factories? And it was obvious that with the traditional way, which each and every brand, each factory was doing, let's say, their inbound supply chain by their own, it was clear that we really radically need to rethink and do a big transformation at the end to come to one eco network. We focus in our initiative, and that's why we will talk a lot about transportation, because the transportation costs are around 60% of our inbound supply chain costs. So that's why it will be a lot on transportation. So our initiative is built on 4 building blocks, and I will go into the details later. Also, Julian will do. And let's start with the first one, bundling forces. So when we looked in the past, our factories, they managed their inbound by themselves. There was no clear requirements towards suppliers, towards logistics providers. There were no bundling of volumes, consolidation, and no standards were set. And more interestingly, as you have seen in this slide with the volatility, for example, we planned a full truck from supplier A to a factory B, and after 6 months we figured out that this full truck is not full. And I'm not sure, I understood there are also some logistic providers here, but so far in my career, no logistics provider came to me and said, Mr. Ileri, I'm sorry, but the truck you are paying a full truck is only half full. So we should maybe change it. That's at least my experience over more than 15 years in this industry. So that's why we sit together with all the supply chain managers in our factories in Europe and defined a best practice process. And we started to say, okay, we need a strategic planning. We need clearly define our requirements towards our suppliers, our logistics providers. We also need to be clear what is, let's say, our transit times and so on. What are the KPIs we are going to measure? In a network optimization, we do this permanently on a holistic base. And then let's say the centerpiece, this is the dynamic capacity planning. And I think Julian will go more into the details. But the idea here was we have to understand, based on our demands from the factories, each and every day we have to adapt our transportation modes, especially with this volatility. And I forgot to mention, what do you think, how many tractors do we build in France in this factory per day? Any idea? 300? No, 60 to 80. So can you imagine, and each of this tractor is a customs order. So you can imagine what requirements we have towards our suppliers. And also one of the requirements was flexibility towards all suppliers, but also logistics providers. So that means we have everyday changing demands. On the operation side, this is, let's say, the piece where you do mainly exceptions because we wanted a very fully automated process. We will come to this later. In the freight management and audit, I think all of you, let's say an industry side, knows invoices from service providers. They are really with a lot of positions and so on. So nobody really can check them. We changed this process and we said, dear Mr. Carrier, please check the invoice. We tell you what we are going to pay. And if you think it's wrong, then please claim. And then, of course, we are measuring not only costs, but also the performance of our suppliers, of our logistic providers, but also of our factories in this process. We have defined a nice process. The question was, who is going to do this? So scenario 1, we said, okay, AGCO will do this. As I said in the beginning, we are a US-based stock, listed at the stock exchange company. So if you go to our management in the US and say, I need 15 people, headcount, that's not a nice word. So scenario 2 we said, okay, we will go and do outsourcing to a so-called 4PL provider. And scenario 3 is we do it together with a 4PL provider. Long story short, we decided for scenario 3, but let's talk a little bit about 4PL. So for our understanding, a 4PL is somebody who is really neutral and who's working on the targets of the customer and is assets free. And when we did this RFQ for a 4PL, of course, we also talked to big lead logistics providers. They called, hey, we are also offering 4PL services. But for us, it was not, we thought there is a conflict of interest because also these companies have assets at the end of the day. So that's why we decided to go with a real neutral 4PL, and I think Julian will also introduce later his company. So we decided to go with 4Flow. Why? Because we had a partner, and I will tell this already, 4Flow has a background starting from IT and consulting, supply chain consulting. So we had real experienced people, which helped us to implement this, and you will see later the results, what we implemented in 18 months, with a break-even of 12 months, which was really great. Of course, with the volatility we had, it's good to have somebody external so we can manage also the resources. We had no IT, let's say, implementation costs, invest, because everything is based on a cloud and we pay this on a transaction basis. But the main point also to go with 4Flow was they committed to a joint target. So we defined a business case which we presented to our management and get approval at the end and get also the funding. So 4Flow agreed together with us to achieve this target, but it was not just for the initial phase. So also going forward, me personally, I have every year budget targets, and I think all of you have this, to let's say, bring productivity, to bring savings at the end of the day. And Julian and his team also committed to these targets. So at the end, we are the internal service provider for our factories in Europe. So process defined, organization was defined. So the question was, what about IT? And I will not go too much into the details, but we have also here 3 different, let's say, IT solutions integrated into one solution and are using them, let's say, in parallel, and they are helping each other, let's say, to do the daily job. And here just some ideas. This is everything what a, let's say, material logistics planner has to consider every day. So that's why it's obvious that you, especially with the volatility, with the changing demands, it's obvious that a normal person cannot handle all these, let's say, numbers at the end of the day. So therefore, you need smart algorithms, and again, Julian will go into more details. But I would like to highlight our risk management. So we all know risk management tools, especially you focus on, let's say, the financial stability of a supplier. What we do is we also look to the whole supply chain. So is there any strike, as an example? 2 years ago, we had at one of our material suppliers a fire in the night. And I think the managing director of this factory was still sleeping. And we received on our app also the information that there is a fire. So, and now guess where this information was coming from. So our tool is also scanning like Google, the whole internet, but also goes into Twitter and Facebook, so social media. So there was a local journalist on Twitter saying, there is a fire at this place, at this supplier. So, and that's why we were informed already. Our Apex tool, this is, let's say, our cockpit where we consolidate all our KPIs, cost, but also performance. And also here, our suppliers and logistics providers, they have let's say, access to this tool. They see their reports and so on. But of course, we also send them the reports per email. That's so far from my side, and Julian will continue.
Thank you very much. He's coming back. He's coming back. He's going to share the great results with you. So, thank you very much, Buelent, for the introduction and for the handover. It's our pleasure to present and share with you today a little bit the focus of what we did together with AGCO in transportation management, especially. Buelent mentioned it already. The agricultural industry is special. The numbers are lower. The volatility is extreme, not even in long cycles, 30% reduction. Also, during the year, we see really dynamics which we have not seen so strong in the automotive industry. So this is really interesting. This was also for us very interesting to partner together with AGCO on this, as we are very much focused on automotive as 4Flow and could share some of the experience there. To start with, I would like to give you a brief introduction into 4Flow. Buelent said that already. We used to be a focused consulting company who also built a software product, 4Flow Vista, for network optimization. That we started back in the year 2000. We grew with that over some 8-9 years when we decided to look into growing our business model and delivering another kind of value to our clients. What we have seen in the consulting especially is the need for continuous optimization, the need for continuous planning, and that was the point in time when we decided to work on the 4PL idea, to offer clients a more continuous support, not only project-based, but really take over some of the responsibilities. And we do take over responsibilities, and we also usually commit on joint objectives to really show that we are in it. And that's really the three business areas we have in 4Flow. It's consulting, it's software, and 4Flow management as the piece where we offer the continuous service. And I'm very happy to see some of our clients here today. 4Flow is quite small. We have to the day about 460 team members who are spread in 4 regions. Now, you might say, this is crazy. Why do you serve 4 regions with such a fairly small team? And the answer to this is, it's our strategy to go where you are, our automotive clients. We want to be able to serve our clients on a global platform and be able to serve not only in Europe, but also in Latin America, maybe China, and of course North America. So providing our clients a global process, a global quality standard, and a global team who's working together. You see that in the bottom, we are heavily engaged in the automotive industry. To share that with you, about 65% of our revenue really comes from you, the automotive industry, and we are quite happy with that. We are recognized. We are recognized by our customers, which makes us extremely proud. We are recognized by the industry, by institutions like the BVL in Germany, just recently the ELA in Europe, but we are also recognized by our team members. And this is something I always like to highlight, that our team members who are delivering the service and the results to our customers are extremely happy with working for us. And we see that in logistics, we are on I don't want to call it war for talents, that's quite an old term, but we are really fighting for the best, and we need to have the best in logistics, and we can offer that with our teams we have. Last but not least, we're neutral. Why are we neutral? We're management owned, so we're not traded publicly, we're not owned by a carrier or something like that. The full company is owned by the management team, and therefore is very looking into sustainable decisions. So much about 4Flow. Let's look into the intelligent transportation management system. When we talk about the intelligent transportation management system at AGCO, AGCO Smart Logistics, we look at a holistic concept. And we do see a combination of an integrated process that is backed and covered and supported by a system and driven by an organization. And this is something I would like to bring a little bit closer to you over the coming minutes. We will also have time to discuss that, of course, after in the Q&A and later today. But before I get into detail of that, I want to make very clear we're on the same page of why we are doing that and what our objectives are. And we are mainly looking for 2 objectives. One is reduction of cost by better utilization of the assets which are driving. So increase utilization in the overall market, that's objective 1. And the second is increase performance in the supply networks of our customers together with the parties. This is what we're striving for. The process. The process itself is here a very, very easy picture. High level, of course, trying to integrate 2 things. Trying to integrate planning processes with executional processes. And this is something which is something we're really focusing on. We want to bring together planning and execution. When I look today in a lot of automotive companies, I see there are planning departments. Some are central, some are decentral, but they are all taking some care of planning. And then I see day-to-day execution. What I see very, very little is the connection in between the planning and the execution. So how do I transfer my great ideas out of the planning team into the day-to-day execution? And what we usually see, and I have lots of examples from that, I see companies running a big network tender where they design a strategic network, then they implement, and then 2 years they come back and re-tender it. And in between, not a lot happens. So our process model is trying to bridge that gap between the planning and the execution. And what we do is we divide planning in 3 different horizons. We have the long-term planning, which is strategically looking forward. How will my network look like in the next year or in the next years? So really anticipating the very future demand by designing the right network setup, the right dots on the map, if you wish so. The second horizon is the technical planning. With that, I still look into the future, but I look into the nearer future. With that, I want to see how will my transport demand look like next month. And then, last but not least, I have the third planning horizon, that is the next day. And that we try to cover with a dynamic balancing by choosing the right transport concept for the next day. With that integrated planning approach, we eliminate waste by choosing the right mode of transportation for the right demand. And we base that on material information. So looking at the example of AGCO, what is it we're doing? We're planning the network design of next year now. How will the volumes go up? And they will go up. We're very happy about that. Redesign the network, decide new hubs, decide new carriers, decide new transport modes, and then over and over, we redesign the transport modes we have in between the dots. And with that, we leverage really utilization in the network. But we have a second objective, not only cost down, service up, and that we do with the transport execution and freight cost management. So we have a highly automated transport ordering process, but we still, as we are in logistics, where a lot of humans interact, we still see mistakes happening. We call them exceptions, and we have to manage them in the most efficient way. And we do that in the process and system support. I'll talk to that in a moment. And we don't only manage the exceptions, but we also track them. So we note them, we ticket them in order to be able to, again, improve the system. Sounds simple, and it is, but you have to do it. Last but not least, we do the freight cost management. We do a self-billing for all lanes, all carriers, to really be fast on the process. System. We do have an integrated system, and again, it's about integration. The system is mainly set up in 4 different modules. We do have a data center where we store all the master data and where we also validate them as much as possible. We have 4Flow Vista that is supporting the visualization and the optimization of the network. We have algorithms running here to really support the planning process. And that I haven't said before. You can't do that on an Excel spreadsheet for a network with more than 1,500 suppliers, 10 plants, and really a global setup. You have to have a software that is supporting that. And in between, we have some web-based modules. The web-based modules connect the parties. They connect the carriers, the suppliers, the plants, and AGCO/4Flow in the network. Last but not least, we do have our analytics software that is used for visualization and communication of the network results. Last but not least, and I realized that over the last maybe 12 months, you do need an organization. And we have set up a hybrid organization with AGCO to manage the process, to use the system in the right way. It doesn't help you just to buy a TMS. That will not solve your problem. It won't maybe not even deliver you the right processes. But you do need an organization that will manage and plan it. What do you need? You definitely need smart people. Logistics requires people who think and find solutions. You need a certain process and IT competence because 2/3 is process and IT. You need people, and that's very important for us, who really focus on performance and cost reduction. Just having people who manage the day-to-day transport will not give you the results. You will also, and that's what we did, we centralized functions. So we centralized functions in AGCO, we centralized them within 4Flow, but we took some out of the plants. Of course, you need to consider and that's what we did heavily, the entire supply chain organization. What's meant by that? It's not only the AGCO 4Flow team, it's the AGCO 4Flow 1,500 suppliers, I think Buelent 60, 70 carriers we have to date, and we need to integrate them in an overall functions, and that's what we did. Further, and that's very important, we had a very, very good senior management support at AGCO, and that is something I would always recommend to get a buy-in from your senior management in order to really make these concepts live. Integration through digital transformation. the web-based modules or EDI modules, what you need and what AGCO did in a very, very consequent way is look into the integration of information across the partners. Buelent was talking about the smart factories, and that is something we've seen, and we also see that in the industry, that the factories are very much in the spotlight. But you do need to have the supply chain as well. So you may know what your supplier may deliver, but then you have a time window of 2, 3, 4, 5 days where you don't know what's really coming and what's on the way. So you need to connect with the suppliers, with the carriers, with the plant sites, and that's at AGCO what we did to really have the information in the cloud, have the information available. So question is why? I think we've answered that already. We have volatility in the network. We have dynamics. We usually cluster 2 different kinds. We look in the network itself. How fast are the dots changing? Are the heavy volumes shifting from one side to the other? What is the long-term volume change? What are the trends? And we do see what we call shipment volatility. So on a certain OD pair, origin, destination, supply relation, how volatile is the shipment size? So do we have one day 5 and the other day 50 pallets on one shipment from the one supplier, or is it steady 10? These are things you have to consider when you want to understand your network, and this is really, at AGCO, what's driving the network tremendously. And we've talked about that. So how do we handle that? I explained that earlier. We have the strategic planning, the tactical, and the dynamic planning to really make sure that all the volatility, which is there, I mean, we would like to get rid of it, but we can't, to handle it the most cost and service efficient way. And why? Because we want to make sure costs are not just for a few months or for a quarter down, but they are sustainably driven down. And that is something we, as consultants, and I've been a consultant for 8 years of my professional lifetime, what we've seen. We have done consulting projects at clients where we've optimized the entire network. We're finished, and 2 years later, we had the customer calling again, hey guys, you need to come back. My network has emerged. I need to replan. And to really make sure costs stay down, you need to do it continuously. I have brought a few samples out of many. One is, this one I like very, very much. It describes what also Buelent has said already. So when we look at tactical planning, what we see is we have suppliers or transport relations, supply relations, where we might start in a certain point of time, and we are clearly on what we call the FTL volume. Getting back to Buelent, this is the time where he bought the FTL from the carrier. Then over time, the volume will go down. And you might want to change the concept because you don't want to drive around with a half-empty truck. So what you see here on the curve, you have a point where you realize, or where you are in an area where you want to change to another concept. And option 1 is you realize that eventually or never. We've seen that. Option 2 is when you plan on historic data, there will be a point in time where you see it happening, and then you will change over to another concept, and eventually you will have the milk run. So you're good, you replan the transport mode, but you do it too late. What we do at AGCO is we plan based on forecasts. So we see in a very early point in time that the demand will change in a few weeks or months. And then we have some time for replanning the transport relation. And we can say, okay, we probably need in 6 weeks' time another concept to the FTL, and we will plan and source a milk run. So at the time where the critical volume shift on the shipment is coming, we are prepared to use a milk run. And this is, again, very simple, but it requires active planning, and it requires that you see that. And how do you see that when you have a network of 70, 80 plants? So you need to have the tools, the processes, and the people in place who do that. This was about cost reduction. The other example is about exception prevention, exception management. This is something I have to be honest, for us, we were in the beginning heavily cost-driven. Why do customers work with us? Because we reduce cost. More and more over the past, and we do this now for 7 years for PL, we have realized how important performance is and what kind of savings can be generated with performance management. And what we have built up is a performance management process that is, of course, first looking for containment, trying to solve exceptions. Carrier's not there, why that? Take actions, make sure carrier is coming. Secondly, we use that information, we pile that information in our data warehouse and analyze that in regards to which supplier had what performance, why was a supplier late, why does a supplier not ship in time. So we cluster roughly 30 to 40 different exception codes on a transport shipment level, and with that we can analyze patterns. We can see who was performing very well, but also who was performing not too well. Again, very, very simple. You just have to do it. You have to have the tools, the process, and the people who do it. And that is something we have done with AGCO very, very successfully by increasing the performance by, 20%? 20% points. That's correct. Yeah? And with that, we avoid exceptions in the future, and that gives more reliability to the network, and hence, your material planning can again work on the inventories, because they know which supplier is reliable, which one is not. So you will be much more precise with your inventories. And as a last slide, I just wanted to share with you how that may look like. We see that for every supplier, for every carrier, we have tracking sheets, and we see what was the performance, when did they not perform, why did they not perform, and we share that in the network. We share that especially with the carriers. In the beginning, we're not always loved for that, but we do have many, many examples where carriers were coming up to us and saying, hey, we didn't believe in that in the first beginning, but we see what benefit we can take out of that. We see how this can help us getting better. And we are also fair. We don't just blame, we say precisely where performance is not well, but we also say where performance is good. So we share the information, the good and the bad, and with the good information we know where to stay good, and with the bad information or the bad performance we know where to improve. And that is what we do in order to reduce transportation cost on the one hand side, first key objective, and second key objective, increase performance in the network. And it's Buelent's pleasure now to present you the results we have achieved with that concept at AGCO.
Thank you, Julian. Just to be clear on the reports and the exceptions, I mean, this is not just for the carriers, these 40 exception codes, it's also for our material suppliers and our factories. So everybody received this report. So it's not just bashing on bad carriers, right? We have also bad suppliers and bad factories. Okay, what are the results? And and I said in the beginning what we have implemented starting in Europe within 18 months, and we implemented up to now globally 20 sites. So we are also doing this now, the pre-carriage in Europe for our North American and South American and Chinese plants. We have implemented around 70 carriers and more than 1,000 suppliers. So I think that was a huge job. And of course, maybe one of the questions was it frictionless? Of course not. But I think most of the suppliers, I would say 90%, there was no issue in adapting this process and also with our carriers. But now come to the financials, and I think this is at the end what counts, especially if you work for an American company. We have reduced our transportation costs over the last 5 years by around 30%. And the point here is, and I think in the beginning there was a discussion, what do we expect from our logistics providers? Yeah, we need cost reductions. 1/3 of this is, call it cost reduction, purchasing, negotiation. This is what we got from our carriers, from our logistics providers. But 2/3, and this is the main part, this is really putting smart ideas, optimization, what we have explained here. So we don't need to wait that our carriers come with nice ideas. I think we as an industry company, and I think a lot of others, we can do this by our own. Of course, you can do it alone. You can get a support from a 4PL, but we can be very creative and achieve really great results. And as Julian said, of course, also if you have a really stable process, a clear process, a standard process, and everybody knows what to do, you can also reduce your inventories, because what inventories like is uncertainty, right? They don't like if it's stable. So you can reduce your inventory, and you can understand our agility, flexibility increased heavily. So the idea was great in Europe. We started in Europe with this, with the biggest region. And our colleagues in China liked it, in North America liked it. So they're currently in the implementation of EcoSmart Logistics in the other regions. And then South America will follow next. Just a final question, just to see if you really got your full attention. So what do you think does EcoSmart Logistics, Airbnb, and Uber have in common? Data, yeah. No idea?
No assets.
Exactly, asset-free. What else? Two, come on. It's dynamic, it's real time, right? And the third, it's all about utilization. So we want to increase utilization. So the others want to utilize beds, the others want car, we utilize trucks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Buelent. Thank you, Julian. I promised in the beginning we wouldn't talk about football. We broke that. Obviously, we had the Cristiano Ronaldo of the logistics world here presenting the results. So thank you for that. I think beyond the very impressive results, I think what's so interesting about this case study, it's not just an IT project, as Julian and as Buelent described. It's a whole organizational and culture change that obviously came into place across AGCO, obviously in Europe, and now as we see across the world. And perhaps the focus also on the intelligence and the people and the skills that are involved. I guess the fourth thing in common must be the brilliant young billionaires that are leading the company, as we see on the stage as well, together with those startup firms. But again, a great case study to get some discussion going, and then we'll obviously have some time for Q&A, as I've said. But first, I'd like to invite Michael Kluger from Neovia Logistics.
Thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure to be back, and especially if you're being thrown between about 150 people and a great lunch. So this is a very coveted spot in this conference. Smart and flexible. Those are two key words in this session, right? These are, in fact, two key words in the whole conference. So some of you, I'm sure, have come here because you're already smart and flexible and you want to see and hear what other people have to say about it. But maybe the smarter and more flexible among you have come here because they want to learn about how to become more smart and more flexible. But what the hell does all that mean? Because those are buzzwords, right? So I had to look in the fine print of the program. And when you look that up, you realize this session is about, and I have to read this out here, complex interconnections and intelligence. It's about optimizing tomorrow's networks. Well, I've done a lot of things in supply chain and logistics over the last 30 and a bit years in my life. The last 4 years of which I worked for Neovia Logistics. And we are a provider of rather sophisticated contract logistics services. We operate sites for our customers, a little over 100 facilities in 26 countries. And while we claim that we are not your typical 3PL, I'm wondering what qualifies me to stand here and talk about optimizing tomorrow's networks. So I was thinking what kind of networks I'm supposed to talk about. IT computer networks? Certainly not. Freight and transport networks? I wouldn't have a leg to stand on after these two gentlemen and what they had presented here, so I better avoid that subject. Is it about your LinkedIn network? Is it about your Facebook network of so-called friends? Probably not. And then it kind of dawned on me when I looked again at what we do as Neovia. When I said we operate over 100 sites, we do that in the realm of aftermarket spare parts logistics. We do that in the context of finished product distribution. That we don't do in automotive. It's more in high-tech and consumer electronics. We also operate facilities in production logistics and production support. Most recently, we took over 4 buildings in the largest truck plant in the world, and we're assembling and sequencing 15, almost 20 sub-assemblies on behalf of our client there. So we do quite some interesting things here, including a wide range of value-added services, inventory management, transport management in a kind of 4PL sense, and I probably need to talk to the 4Flow colleagues here and learn some more from them. Sequencing, assembling, packaging, engineering, all these things. And by the way, in case you missed it, that was the infomercial interlude that I have to do when I speak publicly, but it's over now, so you've done it. But with such a wide range of services and things that you do, you're quickly tempted in our industry to call yourself a provider of end-to-end supply chain, total supply chain services. And some of our competitors, some of the people in our space do that. They call themselves just that. But who in this room can actually claim, and rightfully claim, that they are in full control of even a small part of a supply chain? Is anyone here completely independent of other people to work with, to collaborate with in a supply chain? When I spoke at this conference 3 years ago, was about adding value to the supply chain. We already agreed that any automotive supply chain involves at least 3, 4, 5 of the companies in the room here. We just heard about a part of the supply chain involving 20 facilities, 1,500 plus suppliers, 60 to 70 carriers. So talk about collaboration, talk about networks. So I realized what I really want to dive into a little bit is getting smarter and more flexible in the network of collaborators, in the network of protagonists who work together for the greater good of an overall supply chain. In the kinds of things we do, we have to collaborate, and we gladly collaborate with landlords and developers, because what we do needs a building, needs an infrastructure. We work with forwarders and carriers. We work with integrators, parcel companies who deliver stuff into the facilities that we operate or ship stuff from the facilities that we operate. Work with co-packers, with packaging suppliers, depending on what our customers, our clients have decided how they want to divvy up the supply chain, how they want to award the various pieces of business to the various players. But we also collaborate with competitors from time to time. Now, before you start thinking we're talking about violating antitrust legislation here, let me give you 2 examples. We have a large global key account, an automotive, very reputable automotive OEM, who essentially manages 2 premium brands in their portfolio. Traditionally, one of those brands has their aftermarket supply chain being operated by an esteemed competitor of ours. Let's call them Company X. And the other brand in their portfolio, usually for the last decades, has run their automotive aftermarket supply chain operated by us. Now, this client has some really, really smart people in their logistics and supply chain teams, and they have realized that they want to transition the current setup to something that's more regionally clustered. Because right now, if you have a region like the Americas, like Europe, like Asia, and you have 2 different companies running the processes for the 2 different brands, you're really lacking out on the synergy. So they want to convert that to a regional grouping of pan-brand operations. Now, right now, we're all in the transition period of getting from where they were before to where they want to be. Now, imagine this Company X and us, Neovia, getting into turf protection mode and fighting teeth and claws and trying to protect what we have today. This customer would very quickly decide to go elsewhere and take their business to someone else who's more willing to support them in the evolution of their strategy and their ideas. So one of the tiny examples here is we're currently in this transitionary mode here, or time period. We're working actively with this other company to let them use some of our space in a facility in Japan so that the customer can already start enjoying the synergies of bringing together operations in the same space, in the same real estate infrastructure. So we're collaborating with a competitor. And this is really, and maybe one other example, if I may, we were just a few weeks ago, we're very, very happy to be awarded a very significant piece of business from one of the very large and reputable first-tier suppliers in the automotive industry. And so essentially now we're starting to develop a very highly automated facility for them, a so-called kitting operation. This is, again, in the aftermarket, automotive aftermarket space. So we're going to develop a highly automated kitting operation for them, and that will take about 2 years from now. So the startup is planned for the summer of 2019. From that moment on, that facility will gradually replace current 6 operations. Those 6 operations will be rolled into that new facility over a period of another 2 years. During that period, the companies who are running those other facilities, they were competitors of ours until 2 weeks ago. We were fighting teeth and claws to get the business for this new facility. But from now on, we have to be collaborators because we complement each other. Without each other, we will not be able to make sure that our customer can deliver their service to their clients. So you really need to be aware of when you compete and when you collaborate with someone else in your space. And that brings me to a point where I would like to mention to you and actually like to recommend to you 2 books. So if there is nothing that you take from this presentation, jot down those 2 books. One was already published in 1974 by the great American author and philosopher Robert M. Pirsig, who sadly passed away about 6 weeks ago at the age of 88. And some of you already know the name of the book, the title of the book. Anyone knows that book? Anyone still awake? Anyone? Robert M. Pirsig? Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I'm a biker. Well, I like the title, but it really has nothing to do with motorcycle maintenance. We'll get to that book a bit later. The other book was written by Brandenburger and Nailbuff, and it's called Co-opetition, which is obviously a hybrid term between cooperation and competition. And I hope the authors will forgive me for crudely simplifying some of the key messages in that really fascinating book. But one of the things they're postulating is you really need to cooperate to grow the pie. And then you compete to get your share of that pie. What does that mean in supply chain and logistics? Well, if you look at outsourcing ratios, depending on what studies you read and depending on what you count as logistics services, depending on what country you look at, you get different numbers. But I'll dare you to find any study that says an outsourcing ratio anywhere is even close to 50%. So there is still a lot out there that can be a bigger pie for people in our space as 3PLs or service providers. And if we don't make sure, and I don't mean just we, Neovia, but we as service providers, if we don't make sure that outsourcing becomes a successful experience for our customers, for our clients, then outsourcing will stagnate. Even worse, outsourcing might be reverted and people insource and the pie shrinks again. So again, this is not about violating antitrust laws. This is about trying to get the business that you are well equipped for. And once our client has decided who they want to do, who they want to do what in their supply chain, we really need to work together hand in hand and shoulder to shoulder for the greater good of the customer's supply chain. So again, recognize when someone is your competitor and when someone is a complementer or a collaborator. And it really is important that in such a smart and flexible network of collaborators that we deliver the quality that the client has asked for and that the client has specified in their documents and that the customer deserves. Now, I just use the term quality, and that takes me elegantly back to the other book, to Mr. Pirsig and his book about Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Has anyone in this room actually read that book? And understood it? And you're willing to come up here and explain it? I was hoping there for a moment. One of the key terms, actually the key term in that book, that a lot of that book revolves around, is the concept of quality. Quality, is this about quality management in the way that we all know and love it in our processes? Well, Mr. Pirsig actually says quality is undefinable. You cannot define quality. And by the way, it says that in ancient Greek, the terms for quality and for truth are the same word, which kind of implies that quality has something absolute about it, right? It's either true or not. It's quality or not. Now, Pirsig goes further and he says quality is the perception of quality. Your perception of quality is a function of your upbringing, your education, your social and professional context, many different things. But he also says you know quality when you experience it. When you read or see a piece of journalism, you know whether it's quality journalism. When you listen to a speech, you know whether it's quality. And you've long ago made up your mind about the quality of this speech, and I thank you very much for still being in the room, but I'll take this to a different example now. Has anyone in this room ever put up some wallpaper in their living room? Someone, wallpaper? Built a tool shed in the garden maybe? Fixed your son's tricycle or maybe a motorcycle like Mr. Persick? When you do that, you go to the do-it-yourself store, you buy the best materials you can find, you get all the tools out that you've accumulated over the years and that you hardly ever use, and then you build that tool shed in the garden. And at the end of that Saturday afternoon, you sit down in that garden chair, you pop that can of beer or lemonade or water, you look at that tool shed, and there's two things that you can be thinking. One is, well, nobody's going to notice the little shortcuts and the slight defects I've built into this. It's an okay tool shed. Or you're deeply satisfied with the good job that you've done. And you've done it right. With that wallpaper, or that tool shed, or fixing that motorcycle with either a piece of gum and some sticky tape, or you've done it in a way that makes the machine better after you fixed it than it was before it broke down in the first place. Big difference. Now, what does it have to do with supply chain? Malcolm Gladwell has postulated, I think it was in his book Outliers, has postulated the 10,000-hour rule. Anyone heard of the 10,000-hour rule? Yeah. Loosely based on a study about violin players and the amount of practice they need to put in before they get to anything called excellence. Now, academia is very controversially discussing the way Gladwell has termed that 10,000-hour rule, but one thing is certainly true. You get really, really good at something if you practice a lot. Who in this room has 10,000 hours or more in supply chain and logistics? Come on, hands up. I see you calculating at 10,000 hours. I work 8 hours a day, so that's 1,250 days. So vacation weekends, maybe it's 5 or 6 years. So, but careful. This is about putting in practice. You do a lot of routine work, day in, day out. Unless you're a high-profile consultant, for example, then you are usually on the leading edge of thinking here. But most of us have some day-to-day jobs as well. So if you subtract that from your work time to put in 10,000 hours of improvement and horizon expanding, you probably need to be in the business, 10, 15, 20 years? You're still a 10,000-hour person? Yeah, some of us. Now, quality. When you walk into a logistics operation, distribution center, a cross-dock, a packaging operation, an assembly facility, yeah, you will look at the KPIs, you will look at the numbers. But if you walk with that experience under your belt, if you walk into that facility, you know whether quality is being produced or not. You know whether that place experiences a level of control and discipline. You know when you look into the faces of the people on the shop floor, when you talk to the shop floor associates, you will know very quickly whether quality is in the air, whether there is a passion, and whether there is a fire burning for wanting to do that job right, and whether there is a pride in doing that job right on the shop floor. Big difference. Now, when I was here speaking to you in 2014, I focused on 3 key terms. I'm not going to ask anyone whether they remember because I might be extremely disappointed how little impact I've had in this group, so I'll just tell you. The 3 terms were understanding, alignment, and execution. You have to understand your role in the supply chain. Again, many players in the supply chain. You have to understand your role. You have to understand what difference it makes, how you work and what you do as being a player in that supply chain. You have to make sure that all those players and their targets, their goals are aligned, that everybody's pulling in the same direction, that everybody's working for the same ultimate goal and the greater good of the overall setup. And then you have to execute along the lines of those goals and targets. And especially on those 2 last words, alignment and execution, I made it a point last time that it really has to be around KPIs and targets and numbers. And I'll be careful not to contradict myself from 3 years ago. But I'm kind of fascinated by the fact that you can still learn and expand your horizon at this old age here. So I'd like to take that a step further. There is something beyond KPIs and numbers. And that really is, well, let me ask you two questions. How often have you prepared for a presentation, a review with a customer, or a presentation with your boss, or a sales presentation? And how often have you pulled together statistics, numbers, charts, tables, and you've done it in a way that supports your story? And you've done it in a way that supports the story in the way you want to tell it. How often have you been in a situation where your numbers said one thing, but deep down, with all that experience that you have after those 10,000 hours, deep down, you knew the truth? Remember truth, quality, same word in ancient Greek? Deep down, you knew what the truth was, in spite of the numbers. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is don't hide behind numbers. Use numbers, use KPIs proficiently. Be professional about it up and down the wall. I'm not watering down the message from 3 years ago. But do make sure that you work with those 10,000-hour people. Do make sure that you work with people who can manage and understand and run the KPIs and execute against those KPIs. But work with those people who understand beyond the KPIs and who care beyond the KPIs. Buelent was giving that example of service providers not coming back to you talking about we really should do something about filling the trucks more. Well, that's beyond, well, actually that is even within the KPIs, but that is about attitude and culture. So work with those people who understand the metrics, who are super professional about it, but who go beyond. Work with those people who are not your typical 3PL. And if after a short moment of reflection, or even after a lengthy RFQ process, you come to the conclusion that that means you need to work with Neovia Logistics, I won't blame you, I promise. But in the end, wrapping up, really two key messages. One is quality has a facet beyond the numerical. Quality has an element that is deeply rooted in culture, in attitude, and in passion. And that is something that we all too often forget. We had early this morning, Louis was asking the question about our service providers supposed to be, innovative with one color on the card versus just driving costs with the other color. Service providers, actually all the protagonists and players and collaborators in the supply chain, are supposed to, of course, cut costs, are supposed to, of course, be innovative. But they're supposed to do something that's right and that can make you proud, like you're looking at that tool shed or that wallpaper, and that makes you knowing that you've done a job well. And your customer will realize that. They will know. And the other key message is, like in football, so again, football, sorry. Like in football and supply chain, you never walk alone. There's always someone else who depends on you, and there's always someone else on whom you depend. And be very clear at every moment who you compete against versus who you collaborate with. And that is something that in the daily life of business we all too often forget. And for me as a German engineer, it was really a stretch to talk about the philosophical aspects of quality, to talk about things that go beyond numbers and figures and mere facts. And I very much thank you for indulging me on that. And my colleague Sasha Tilly, who sits over there somewhere, and myself, we're really looking forward to questions and conversations later on the floor and over lunch and during the rest of the conference. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. Well, I mean, I think you pulled off the philosophy quite well. We'll call you our logistics philosopher from now on. The session, the title, as we talked about, smarter and flexible. If it was out of context, you might have thought you were coming to a yoga session or something. And then we did actually move into Zen and Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is a great book, by the way. So, I like the holistic journey that we've traveled here. But I think Michael's kind of key messages there really, they echoed very, very interestingly what some of the things that came out of the project at AGCO, because whether it's the focus on quality and looking at the data and beyond the data, again, the people that you need to interpret, to look beyond just what the numbers say, because the numbers will tell you one thing, but it's not always the full story. And of course, this supply chain never walks alone. That's something that I think Buelent hit right kind of in the beginning when you talk about how you bring together this network and work across the plants and across the carrier base, and to find a neutral ground in a way to also manage that. So I think whether that's for tomorrow's supply chain or today's, I think it's kind of universal, and that will sort of stay. So thank you very much to our speakers for those messages. I think that was quite interesting. We do have some time for Q&A. So I would like to we'll have some microphones going around. Usual, as we said before, say your name and company, and as Louis always says, not asking a question isn't going to bring lunch any sooner. So we're going to have to stick it out. But I'll kick us off. Coming back on this beyond the numbers scenario, can you, to Buelent and to Julian, perhaps to start, how much in terms of what the KPIs, or maybe on the KPIs, what the data and analysis from the TMS was telling you in cases in your planning and analysis, were your partners, whether the plants or carriers, were they pushing back on some of those in cases, trying to say, no, we disagree with what you think we should be doing now, whether it's the change in modes or in other kind of processes? And I mean, how flexible would you say your team is to take in their feedback, perhaps give it context beyond just the pure numbers? Is that a challenge in that process?
So what we've seen in AGCO is definitely an evolving conflict level. So in the beginning, we did have some feedback from a plant side. One plant was a little bit more aggressive to have change, as the other was a little bit more hesitative. And this is really where we see on the plant level or on the customer level that we have to talk and explain, sometimes over and over again, also to share the benefits and to let people know what their benefit is out of that. Because it's, from our experience at AGCO, it's not that people don't want to change. We just have to explain them what will change for them and what's the benefit to that. And we do that two ways. One is maybe more the emotional way, touching the people and showing them the potential work shed they may have in their garden or the wallpaper, and explaining them that this will be a bigger good and they can be proud of. So that's the emotional piece. But then we have the KPI piece, where we also try to bring as much facts and figures to make them sure to know that it's not only just a feeling we try to create, but it's really we try to deliver benefits. And that is something we've done at AGCO quite extensively, as also for the American company, as Buelent said, they're very much facts and figures based. And that was blended in together very well, and one was supporting the other. So that was maybe the way how we approached that and how we finally succeeded in that. And sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's not so fast, but in total it was 18 months.
I absolutely agree, and I would like to add exactly in the beginning, our material supply chain organization was more a gut feeling. This carrier is not performing well, this supplier is not performing well, but now we have the facts, right? And also our suppliers and carriers really appreciate that, because it's not a gut feeling anymore.
Okay. Any questions? We have a question right in the front here. We'll have a mic coming right behind you. So in the third row.
Stefan Freichel, Cologne University of Applied Science. Question to gentlemen from 4Flow and AGCO. I mean, knowing your companies quite well, I must say, I always ask myself, how can it be that since 10 and more years we talk about supplier integration, carrier integration, and how important that is, that a company just now, a few months, years ago, realized that they need to change and that they put 4Flow in the boat? How can it be that supply chain organizations since 10 years haven't done anything? And we know many other companies who are at the same stage. So what keeps us away as supply chain specialists in industrial companies that the situation is as is, that 4Flow has excellent business potentials, of course, because the world is bad. So maybe just let us know a little bit about what happened 10 years before you realized that you need to change.
I mean, if you just look what happens last year, and as said in the beginning, AGCO has grown rapidly through acquisitions. So, of course, each of the brands, each of the factory has a so-called supply chain organization. But as we go to platforms, more common suppliers, we didn't have any standard. So, and 5, 6 years ago, there was a rethinking, a strategic rethinking from our chairman, where we started really on each departments in purchasing, in engineering, in sales, marketing, and of course in logistics supply chain to come to one AGCO and to speak with one voice. And of course the need was at the end the money, right? Because we were not profitable. We have still issues in profitability, to be honest, and if you can see our results. So there is a huge potential. So, but again, coming back to your question, and you said 10 years ago, I mean, 4PL, when I started my career in consulting, my first job was, I was also a consultant, and we made the research on 4PL. And that was in the late 90s, beginning of the 2000s area. So, and why have we waited, let's say, 15 years to present a concept which is awarded by the German supply chain organization, by the European? Because the reason is very easy. Because 15 years ago, first of all, we didn't have the data, we didn't have the system, and more importantly, we didn't have trust. Today, we exchange everything, right? We exchange, through Facebook and whatever kind of social media, and it's the same in business. So we share with our suppliers data, with 4Flow, we share all contracts and so on. And it was very important we have a neutral 4PL, because just imagine we would share Schenker tariffs with Kühn und Nagel. Very difficult. Does it explain?
Thank you. And isn't that part of the issue? If we talked about the 4PL definition, you might have been researching in the late 90s. I'm not sure that it would have looked exactly as this either. I mean, there are still different variations, probably set in this room as well. You've talked about it as a hybrid, right? So, I mean, where would you kind of put the line in a sense between 4Flow and AGCO and perhaps the plant supply chain managers? I mean, for example, who's doing the carrier selection, who's doing the routing on a kind of day-to-day, the full truckload? I mean, I appreciate the analysis you're doing, but where does the kind of decision lines begin and end across that?
So the strategic and network planning is done together, AGCO and 4Flow. The middle part, the operations, the dynamic planning, the freight cost, let's say, audit is done by 4Flow. And then controlling is done again together.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the fears is the sheer complexity of inbound networks, where that is really hindering companies to move into that direction. Because an inbound network is highly complex. When we look in automotive industry, we have a supplier base of 1,000 plus usually at the bigger first tiers, OEMs for sure. And it's just so, it is difficult to bring that together, and you have to want to tackle that challenge in a consistent way, bring the pieces together, and really harmonize processes across the plants and take away things from the plant. Let's face it. We removed a lot of responsibility from the plants and centralized it in order to make sure everything is running in one way across suppliers, plants, and carriers, and to keep that running for some time. And that just takes a lot of management effort and work effort.
Thank you. We have a question right in the back, actually. We'll take that. Yep.
Yes, this is Marcus Ramirez with FedEx. Very interesting presentation. I've seen it in Berlin at the production conference already, but still impressive. I have a question related to the savings of, I think you said 28%. And I think there were two components. One is an engineering component where you focus on standardization, and the other one is in fact transport optimization. So can you talk about those 28% and how much is associated with standardization and how much is associated with optimization?
I'm not sure what you mean with standardization, optimization.
Well, I think there was a picture of a truck where you'd standardize components and parts. And I understood this is also part of the project, or wasn't it? Maybe it wasn't.
Not so much. Not so much. What we were sharing is that some portion of the savings, and I think it was like roughly 30%, was coming from strategic tendering, from bringing volumes together, and the other 2/3 were coming out of engineering and optimizing really the network, finding the right transport mode at the right time for the right origin-destination pair or supplier-plant relation, and consolidating volumes in the network and finding the synergies, and of course, keeping that up to date. So there we see a 1/3 that comes really from a combined tender out of purchasing, and 2/3 out of the transportation management process as such, if that answers your question.
And I think, Christopher, you asked the question, who is deciding? It's AGCO deciding on the supplier. So 4Flow supports us in the tender process, which is standardized, let's say. But at the end, AGCO is taking the decision, and AGCO is paying the bill. So there is no invoice which goes through the, let's say, 4Flow, let's say, accounts payable. It's all paid by AGCO.
And that selection is the AGCO, call it group logistics central function,
Yeah, exactly.
as opposed to the individual plants.
Yes.
Yeah. It was Michael, obviously, who raised, we'll come one second, to the co-opetition. And you know, it also made me think, Buelent, because you made the comparison, what do we have in common with Uber, Airbnb? You talked about data and dynamics. But the obvious other thing that they do is the shared assets, right? Yeah. So it's opened between. So, I mean, how much can or could we share? You talked the examples you talked about in a specific example with the contract shift, but how much further can we go in this industry in terms of your empty truckloads getting sold to a competitor, or even kind of putting that out on an available platform where that could be done? I mean, is that a potential step in future?
That's not a potential. I forgot to mention this. So we are doing for one of our tier 1 suppliers who is doing, let's say, transmissions for our Beauvais, France factory. We do this process for them. That means we have included them in our contract because our volume is much bigger. So we have more, let's say, negotiation power. Yeah. But 4Flow is managing their inbound supply chain on the same system, and we get the same reports and we manage that for them. So that's why it's really an open approach. And of course, having somebody neutral, we are open to discuss, and we do that already with other 4Flow customers. Mm-hmm. How can we have a joint network as an example? But for a tier 1 supplier, we are doing it.
And Michael, do you see more scope for that in contract logistics as such?
There certainly is. I mean, we all know about the difference between dedicated operations versus multi-client operations. And in any multi-customer, multi-client setup, there is ample sharing, not just only of resources and resources in a daily environment, but there is really a synergistic sharing of capacities, of balancing out fluctuations, and that has to be accompanied by a certain level of openness and sharing of information. Otherwise, you're building up artificial roadblocks and you're hindering such synergies and such values to be generated. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think we had a question. We had a hand in the back if it's still, yeah?
Thank you for sharing this nice example on transportation optimization and maybe planning optimization. And my question is actually, sorry, I forgot to say, I'm Ernst van Klinken from VMT EcoPack. My question is coming from the packaging side. To what extent have your systems already gone one level deeper into that chain, going down to the packaging unit and really optimizing it on that level? So not on a truck level, but on a packaging unit level.
So when we do our planning, I will back up a little bit. When we do our planning, we go on the material part and the material demand. So we look really on what's the material demand in the plant, and from that we go to the packaging unit. So right direction there. We look on how is material packed and how can we put that onto a truck. And our planning process is incorporating, of course, how is the material packed? And when we look into planning and cost optimization and increasing utilization on truck, this is essential to have the right packaging in order to avoid cost and in order to avoid air on the truck. So we differ between, of course, the utilization of the truck filled with boxes, but we also look inside the boxes and try to find out what's really the good on the truck. And these are two different KPIs. And so packaging is very, very important for us and, of course, very important for cost optimization by better utilizing trucks.
And Mike, so I'm clear, is there returnable built into the optimization as well, sort of deciding where that should go and who can use it? Yeah. Any last question from you? We'll take that as the last question. Okay, we have two, I guess. We'll let each go. So we'll start in the corner there. Yeah, put your hand up again, and then we'll come back here.
Hello, thank you. So my question is for Michael from Neovia. My name's David Brindley from Jaguar Land Rover. You touched on it in your presentation, and it's been mentioned a few times, people saying service providers need to be more flexible and more innovative. But I always feel that's a bit of a cop-out, because sometimes for some suppliers, they can only be as good as a customer. So I suppose my question to you is, obviously we've had a long-standing relationship as two organisations. If I was to say to you as a customer, you need to be more flexible and innovative, then what are you saying back to me that I need to do to enable you to do that?
That is an excellent question. Matter of fact, let me just step back just a little. I've been a customer myself, colleague of some of the people in the room here, and I've always appreciated service providers who not only were sitting in front of my desk when I asked them to come for some crisis management, but who actively knocked on the door a few times a year and came forward with ideas. And I have to say, I had some customer service reps from service providers, from carriers, logistics providers, who did exactly that. 3-4 times a year, they got themselves a slot and they had a list of 10, 20 ideas. And unfortunately, 80% of those ideas could not be executed because I was not flexible enough. I, as a customer, had some roadblocks. My systems were a bit rigid, or my procedures were not too easy to be changed. But I think in the spirit of this collaboration that we talked about earlier, I think it's healthy to challenge each other and to keep each other on their toes. Now that is a bit naive and idealistic as a service provider, because ultimately the customer is the customer and we have to follow and serve. But really the most healthy relationships that I've seen in my life is where both parties keep poking each other and keep provoking each other in a positive and constructive sense. And as a matter of fact, I'll be next week, Monday, Tuesday, I'll be with some of your colleagues in Whitley again, and we'll have exactly those kinds of discussions. Those transitional periods that we're going through with you guys these days provide for ample opportunity for change and for disrupting things and the way things are today. And we're trying, as service providers, I'm sure I speak for all the other service providers in the room, we're trying very hard to play exactly that role, to not just do what you're asking us to do, but to come forward with things that are maybe beyond what other people have thought about, to provoke, again, in a positive sense. And we're hoping for people to not just sit back and go, I'm the customer, you do what I want, but for people to work with us and explore the next stage and then explore the next generation of a better supply chain together. Openness and collaboration.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we're running a bit short on time and we have lunch, but I'll let that last question, if it hasn't been asked yet. There was the question in the back. Actually, I don't think was that the gentleman who actually had his hand up at the time? You have the microphone, please. Go ahead and use it.
Yeah, hi, this is Klaas-Jan Kok, working at TNT Express, now a FedEx company. I think it was a very interesting presentation about inbound production, a key focus also for TNT and FedEx. And the thing I thought was very interesting to see that on the modes of transport you shown in your example, I see FTL, I see LTL, I see groupage. And I hear you saying that actually one of your core activities now is to create networks. As somebody working in TNT and FedEx, we are an integrator, and it's our core activity as well to manage networks on a daily basis. So I was interested to learn from you whether there were any reasons why you have or have not considered to work with like an integrator type company to become part of your model.
No, we for sure we work also with these integrators, if you also mean integrator like Schenker, DHL, Daxa. Because, and to be sure, we don't operate a network. So even if we build up a cross-dock, we have companies like you running this cross-dock. But what we did is we are splitting the transport. So pre-carriage, we are looking for the experts. For the cross-dock operations, we look for an expert. And then also for the full truck, ideally, we look for an expert. So I think this is what we changed. And when I started 7 years ago with AGCO, my first task was, to integrate, to bundle volume, and to give all of the volume, ideally to get a better price, to 1, 2, 3 big integrators. Today we changed, so today we don't work with 70, and you will agree there are not 70 Schenkers and Daxas in the world. So we worked with 2 PLs. So these are exactly your suppliers, but you will understand that there is a margin in between, which we also would like to take on ourselves.
Well, I think that's the sort of discussion we like having, and I think we'll continue that sort of debate because it can go back and forth. I encourage you to continue it over lunch, which is about to be hosted by UECC. In a moment, I want to ask you to give a round of applause to our audience, to our panel. But what you can do, which is kind of even more useful, is actually to quickly vote on the session. We told you in the first session we have our live feed, and that's where we have a question that's going to go up in a moment, 2 questions actually, and ask people to vote on how you found the session. I don't want to go into every little detail how we do this, but you had an email this morning with a link, and it had the link that you needed to get onto the system. Otherwise, it's in the program. We'll flash it again later. The badge number they asked for is the delegate numbers on your badge. That's what you use to log in. So if you can do that, we'll vote on this, and then there'll be another one. And we're doing this at the end of each session. We'll keep that up, and you can vote, and then there'll be another. So that's probably the best way that you can tell us what you thought of the session. But in the meantime, please do more traditionally give us an old-fashioned round of applause, because I think it was a great discussion. And now I'd like to, after you voted, please join us next door for the UECC-hosted lunch. Thank you.